One, two,
Two,
one, two,
one, two.
two. Your speaker is on. Can you hear me?
Hear me?
No, on the Zoom. Yeah, it's here already in. I can see it. Yeah, yeah, I see the audio coming in here. Oh, let me see. Microphone is off. Hold on. Test, 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 test. Test, test. Let me turn this volume. Monitor. Where's the monitor? Testing, 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 testing. Master, testing. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. Test. Testing, testing. One, two, one, two. Test, test. One, two, one, two. One, two, one, two. Test, 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 test. One, one. Test, testing. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. Test, test, test. One, one. Yeah. Test, test, one, two, one, two, one, two. Okay, that's good. Test, 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 test. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. Test, test, one. Test, 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 test. One, two. Test, test, test. One, two, one, two.
No audio here.
Oh, that's all right. Hold on, Chris. It's on. All right. Okay. Mike, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
The group. So I'm gonna go around and give hot mic to anybody. All right, here we go.
Hi, everybody. Barry from AJA. I just have two bits of news to share. Mike Agoric is retiring, and so we'll have a new salesperson here for the territory, Brandon Wagner. And we have new power supplies, 28-watt power supplies for our manufacturing. Put that out there to the universe. Thank you for being AJA supporters.
All right, fantastic. Anybody else at the table? All right, Mr.
All
Bottom table.
right.
Anybody? Anybody here at this table? This was the most vocal one. All right, he's in.
I'm in. Okay, two things. One is various people have asked, how do you become an STE member? And so we haven't refreshed that for a long time. So if you've been to 5 of the last 10, I believe it is, 5 of the last 10, you qualify. And then all you need to do is get sponsored by any other member. And the easiest way to do that is just come and find one of us that's got a badge. Come find me and talk to Bobby. But if you've been to 5 of the last 10, we'll look for you in our records and we'll try to send you an email. But on top of that, if you've been to 5 of the last 10, feel free to reach out to us and we'll put you into, hopefully in January, January, February, we'll get another vote out. Second announcement is Diversified is looking for engineers. And I think our website now is onediversified.com. And look at the career section or find me and I'll get you set up in the right direction. Thank you. Happy holidays.
That's great. So yeah, come find me, which is a very good point. Not only do our members, have a great time with the group here, it's a great time to see people, but also bring in new people, job opportunities. So recruit, recruit people in your organization to come and join as STE is fantastic. All right.
Hi, everybody. Joe O'Hanlon. So I stumbled on this book. I stumbled on this book as I was cleaning up lots of stuff in my archives. I was so unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. So this is a book by John Watkinson, a small book called The Engineer's Guide to Standards Conversion, which a lot of us have read. Some of us haven't. There'll be a quiz later. But John Watkinson was a legend in his own time, and I want to share an anecdote. So he was brilliant. He wrote The Art of Digital Video and The Art of Digital Audio, which was very fundamental information for those of us who went from the analog to digital conversion, which was, a significant thing. So in 1998, I attended a MPEG-2 Let's Learn About How to Do Compression. And John was the presenter. And John, if anybody has ever met him, he had an idiosyncrasy, which was his body had some issues. He was very contorted. He didn't have a lot of flexibility. He had to move like this or that. And so to break the ice at the beginning of this lesson, this is the true story, and this is 1998. And he said, for those of you who are a little bit, he was British, I'll try my British accent. For those of you who are a bit off-put from my behavior, I tried taking this latest thing called Viagra. And unfortunately, it got stuck in my throat. So that was in the good old days when you could tell jokes like that, and hopefully in this room you can repeat them. So thank you for listening.
That's fantastic, Joe. Okay, anybody here at this table? Open mic. All right, next. How about this table? Anybody? Bill? Doug? It stays there, huh? All right, how about this table? And Lloyd? No? All right. And one last table? Going once. All right, we have two.
I'm Dan Herman. I'm with California State University, San Bernardino, and I'm in the middle of doing live sports production for all the smaller universities are Division II, and we're transitioning to live streaming every sport multi-camera. And so I'm always looking at, well, PTZ cameras, heads and stuff. And those are my challenges now because they want all this stuff and my venues aren't all equipped for technology.
Well, I was just going to say Dan came really far to get here, so that was it for me.
Welcome, Dan. Yeah, this is a great source. Lots of engineers here have been doing live as well as TV for a while. Okay, I think I missed something. I am Bobby Stevens. I am your new president. Recently elected. Like I mentioned last month, I had to travel, so Paul took my place. Welcome, everyone. We have a very exciting presentation about DVD technology with a gentleman, pardon me, who holds well over 50 patents in the technology and really started that evolution of digital video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it off to him. One other piece of housekeeping is I would like to appreciate Terry and Chris for putting all this together. I am just the enabler. I'm just the person who comes out, gets up and says hello. So thank you very much. And hand it off to Chris. Yep. Big hand.
Does this work? It does. Okay. I have to object to you assuming facts, not an evidence about how much people are going to enjoy this. So, hello, good evening. Good to see you. I had some thought going through my mind that I haven't been to an STE meeting since about 1988. And I wasn't sure as many people as I recognized would be here tonight, and I didn't know how many people there were who wouldn't even know what a vacuum tube was. And that's actually a reference to the fact that I was at university 2 weeks ago talking to some faculty and students, and the subject of vacuum tubes came up, and most of them had never seen one or didn't really know what it was, let alone how it worked. So when you get to be a little bit older, you realize that things change over time, and what we assume to be the case sometimes is different than it was. When I started engineering school, I started working at a TV station in Phoenix. The same year I started engineering school that happened to be almost exactly 60 years ago. And the first class I had in in engineering school was a circuits class that was all vacuum tubes. They didn't let us deal with transistors until we were sophomores. So that was ways back. So I started thinking that in the context of when we talk about DVD actually really started getting life pumped into it in about 1992, which is over 30 years ago. And so given that students, they have a list they publish every year of things that you should know about your students. And years ago when my wife was in college, her professor was the guy who did that list. And the things were like, John Lennon has always been dead. But now his son is in his 60s, so it doesn't sing as much. But anyway, I wanted to start at the beginning on DVD, and to start at the beginning on DVD, you have to actually start about before the beginning of DVD. And so the thought that I had was, if we talk about what the world was like in the year that people started working on DVD, that we had digital recording, D1, D2 and all that, they were all well established. We all had those and had for some time. The idea that you could put pits in plastic and read them to get data recovered from a disc, Sony and Philips had proven that to us a long time ago with CD. The home video business was mostly all VHS, and some people were really devoted to laser discs. But I remember there was one guy who used to follow me around when we were introducing DVD, and we'd explain DVD, and we didn't have working models yet, but we talked through all the the technologies and the issues. And this guy dogged me, and he dared me to admit that it was never possible for a DVD to look as good as a Laserdisc, and he would give me $10,000 in cash if I'd say it right now. So I never said it, and it was and it was never true. The theaters had already Dolby Digital Sound and DTS, so that the idea of delivering digital sound was already established in the marketplace. So these are all things that, as I look around the room with a number of gray heads, you all know this already. The big challenge for home video, and the thing that led to the focus on DVD, was the home video business at the time was mostly rental, and they would sell a tape to a rental store for like $69, and then that was it, and you didn't have to make very many of them. But then they started to get the idea that all this digital stuff is coming, and that we have to have an answer to actually get into more hands and more people and expand the business. And so the idea of having something that was inexpensive to manufacture was important. But the problem was that if you were making VHS tapes, it took 2 hours to make a VHS tape. There were several people who invented machines that were supposed to high-speed replicate a videotape, but I never saw one that actually worked. And I don't know anybody who actually ever used them. So the way it worked in the business is you would have warehouses full of VHS machines, and people would run around and load them, and then they'd punch record, and then they'd feed 2 hours worth of movie or whatever it was, and record them, and then they had to rewind it, and they had to eject it, they had to package them up. So it took considerably more than 2 hours to make a movie on a DVD, on a VHS. And that wasn't actually sustainable, because one of the key things was, if you had a movie, you thought, I'm going to sell this to consumers, and I'm going to sell 3 million of them. Well, then the day it went to the market, you had to have made 3 million of them. And if you overshot and didn't sell 3 million, you would eat whatever it was that you didn't sell. But if you were really had a hit, if you really had a hit on your hands, what you do is you'd say, I need another 3 million. So that by the time you got them, the wave had passed you and you missed. So the driving force in wanting to have something better came to us from Warren Lieberfarb, who was the guy running the home video division at Warner at the time. And he said, I have to have something that is attractive and sexy, like a CD. I have to have something that I can manufacture them quickly. So if I think I can sell 3 million, I'll start with one. And if it's a success, I can get, in a week, I can get another 3 million. And I want to be able to make it and sell it profitably for $10, which you couldn't do at the time with anything. And so that was what the motivating business model was that told us we had to come up with something. And DVD is what we came up with. Another thing that characterized the industry at the time was Time Warner Cable and Warner Brothers had a chairman named Jerry Levin who backed, they called him in Business Week magazine, they called him the techie at the top. And he backed a lot of projects. One of his key projects was called the Full Service Network. And this was an idea that they tested in Orlando, Florida, on the cable system. And what it was designed to do was to test a couple of premises. And the first premise was that if I gave you movies on demand or other video on demand, that you could control as if you were running a VCR, back and forth and so forth, still frame, whatever, that would be attractive to consumers, and that you could start dealing with movies that people could control when they watched them as if they had a VCR. And so that was the first premise. Second premise was, if I have this digital connection to the house, I can sell you stuff. You want pizza delivered, you go to a screen, you tell them want pizza delivered, and they deliver it. In short, the vision was everything you do today on the internet practically would be delivered to you by your cable company. That's actually what happened to work out, except that the cable company never thought they were just going to be your ISP. They thought they were going to be participating in all these businesses. So anyway, we were part of Time Warner, obviously, and we started working with the cable company, and we had issues with the way the compression was being done. The boxes that they were using were Silicon Graphics computers that cost $4,000 each. So it wasn't ever going to be a profitable business, but it was a laboratory to test the premise that these things would work. And so there were computers in 4,000 homes. And we had opinions about how they ought to look, and so they gave us the responsibility of compressing all the movies. Well, video compression at the time was not something you bought off the shelf. So we ended up getting development systems from C-Cube that were used to do the compression. MPEG 2 wasn't here yet, so we did MPEG 1 Plus, which was just double resolution MPEG 1. And we we had to solve all the issues related to how you deliver video on demand. Excuse me. One of the first ones that was upon us was, if those of you, I look at this room and you all know about 3:2 pull down and the sequence that you do to get a 24 frame film to run at 30 frames. Well, at the time, mastering was done where you'd punch in and punch out and punch in and punch out, and that the 3:2 sequence that would follow was random. Sometimes it would match and sometimes it wouldn't. We found this as we looked at all the masters from all the studios, and we started compressing them, because the first step in compression is to throw out the redundant stuff. So you would take it, but when it had been manufactured, it had been done in a way that the 3:2 would go 3:2, 3:2, 2:2, 3, 3:2, 3:2, and then every time it would screw up, you get strange looking pictures, and so you had to go back and fix it. So that was one of the first problems we had to develop a solution for when we were starting to do in commercial business compression and delivery that way. The end game was that during the run of that test, Warner's California Video Center did all the compressions for all the studios to deliver to the Time Warner Cable experiment in digital delivery. But that was part of the motivation for Warren to want to have a system that would stand up to a market where you can just get it delivered over your cable that way and have all of the flexibility. Oh, thank you. And you could have all of the flexibility as if you had a VHS tape. So another factor from that era was that Toshiba owned a small piece of Time Warner. And it was about 2.5%, if you remember. Anyway, so they owned a piece of Time Warner, and so they started working with Warner to try and kick around what they could do together on video. And then eventually Time Warner pulled people from all of its divisions, and then Toshiba pulled people from all of their divisions to have a big powwow in Beverly Hills to try and see where can we work together. And there were ideas about telephones and all kinds of other things that might happen. Nothing ever happened out of that whole thing except DVD. And DVD became the focus of the work by Time Warner and Toshiba. And, excuse me, can we? Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, so we don't need quite as much because I hear the feedback. Okay. So anyway, there were multiple concepts that we started out with from Toshiba and Warner Brothers, and we called them, two of them were Bugs and Taz. And Bugs was a system that uses a 1.2 millimeter thick disc, just like a CD, 5 inches wide, 1.2. And that was we called Bugs. We went through and tested all of the ways you could make it and what you could get on it, and rejected it. But we ended up with Taz, named after the Tasmanian devil, who we exploited a great deal while we were doing this, and because it spun so crazily. So the Taz disc was one that actually had 2 discs. And many of you may know that the DVD is made with 2 discs, 0.6 millimeters thick each. And then they're pressed together and glued. And then you read the data through one layer. And because it's half as thick as a CD, and you use a red laser, it's able to focus on a much smaller pit on the disc. And so the result is that you can get more pits on a disc in the same space. And at the time the DVD went into production, that we were told that the pits on DVD is the smallest thing being manufactured commercially in the world at the time, because it was such a small pit that to press them reliably required that they be small enough to get enough data on the disk. And so Toshiba ended up with the ability to put 5 gigabytes on one layer of one disk. And that's what we went to work with. So the question was what to do with it. Now, one of the first issues was that NHK had done some research, and they came out with the results that they came down from Mount Fuji engraved in stone tablets that said you must have 6 megabits per second to do a decent standard definition picture. And if you can't get that, there's no sense trying. So later you'll see, as we came up with the systems that we came up with and were working and took them out into the marketplace to talk to other manufacturers, everybody quoted us. NHK says you can't do it unless you can get 6 megabits. if you've got 6 megabits in the video and 3 channels of audio, you have something on the order of 9 gigabytes worth of data. And so the answer was, you've got 5 gigabytes? Don't even try. I mean, I remember a meeting Warren and Lieberfarb and I had with a guy named Mickey Shuloff, who used to be the president of Sony America, in his office in New York, where we explained it to him and wanted to work together. And he said, the engineers say it can't be done until you get, the ability to get 6 megabits per second for a whole movie. So we're not interested. And that was the answer we got from everybody, because that's how much influence NHK had. So that was one of the things that became a challenge for us. And we worked out, yes.
A little bit of a technical thing. You mind if we adjust this a little bit?
I do not mind. I can't see it, so.
Okay. Is that good?
Is that good?
Is that good, Jim? Everyone?
Do I have the approval of the room? Okay. So the first thing we set to work at was thinking about how to get the movie into a lower data rate. So Louis Osterver, who is here, and I spent a goodly time in Tokyo looking at the movie The Bodyguard, compressed at different data rates, and going through scene by scene and grading what the picture looked like scene by scene. And we came up, after all of this heavily scientific analysis, we came up with the conclusion that sometimes 6 isn't enough. Sometimes you need 7 or 8. And a lot of times 6 is way too much, and you can get by with 1 or 2. So having done this test, we came to the conclusion that 3.5 megabits per second was a reasonable rate to get a good quality picture on a disc. And 3.5 megabits per second, coupled with 384 kilobits per second on Dolby AC3 for the audio, and plus like 10 kilobits per second for subtitles, it comes up to about, on a 135-minute movie, 4.75 gigabytes. So we said, this works. So we went to work with Toshiba to start testing this. And the answer was, on every project we looked at, that we could do a very favorable job within that data budget if we approached it that way. So that was the first thing. Yeah, got to look at my notes. Another thing about subtitles, everybody wanted to put in an alphabet so that you could put in text files that would then bring up that alphabet in whatever type style you wanted to use to show the subtitles. Well, this is one of the first big disagreements we had with the studio versus the consumer electronics company, because they said in their budget to build this thing, they couldn't afford to put more than 1K of memory in it. Because memory was so expensive in 1992 that this is not possible. So we ended up coming up with a plan to use bitmaps, and that way all the data requirement fell to the disk, not to the player. And so every DVD has a spec in it that just gives you the chance to put a bitmap in to make subtitles. But that was one of the things that was not saving data on the tape, but saving, not tape, disk, but it was a chance to save the amount of data it took to run the machine itself. So that was. Other things then that we developed were ways to do track mixing, so that you could, if you wanted to, put the soundtrack on once and then don't have any dialogue in it, and then mix the dialogue in under command on a case-by-case basis, and that would save a substantial amount of data. In the end, I don't know that anybody ever actually used that, but it's in every DVD player that's ever been built, is the ability to mix the tracks to reduce the data requirement to do that. Another thing we did that we were looking at, and this behind you is the first patent we ever got. And what it is a system where we said, look, we know that Europe is already experimenting with the 16 by 9 experiment in Europe. High definition TV is coming, and it's going to be 16 by 9. And so if we're going to launch this product in the mid-1990s, by the end of the 1990s, it'll be obsolete if it only has one aspect ratio, or you're going to have to stock 2 SKUs of discs, one for widescreen and one for narrow. So one of the ideas we had to reduce the inventory cost was to make it so that every DVD player has the ability under the command on the DVD to show a 16 by 9 picture on a 16 by 9 TV set, or to show a 16 by 9 picture letterboxed on a 4 by 3 TV set, or to select slices out of the 16 by 9 picture to give a 4 by 3 picture on regular TV sets. And so that was one of the first things that we actually got a patent approved on, which was kind of fun. And so we worked on that. So now we had Brad Collar was supposed to be here because he was going to bring some prototype DVD players that are in the Warner Brothers archive, but the ones that he has looked very much like DVD players as we came to know them, not the small ones of the most recent times, but the ones that were in the market at the beginning. But the prototypes that we had actually were seven boards stacked up with spacers between them. And when we started to do demonstrations, we felt it was important to show exactly what it was and exactly how it was running and what was real. And so everything that we put in the demos, and Terry, and yes, was part of all of that. And the result was that when we did demos, we showed a real playing system that if it worked, it worked. If it didn't work, we'd let you know that too. But it was generally successful. And what we tried to do was compare what we were proposing to that laser disc that guy always told me was going to be better than anything we could do. And what happened was that we set up a demonstration room with 2 TVs, 25-inch TVs. They were always either Sony's or Toshiba's because they were the ones that reproduced most reliably, and a lot of variation in a lot of other manufacturers at the time. So we set it up, and we would play a laser disc. And we would say, this is a laser disc. Does it look right? And people would say, yeah, it looks right. This is how it's supposed to look, right? And everybody would agree with that. And then we switched the same picture on running in sync in the adjacent monitor. And the first thing you always heard was, what'd you do to the laser disc? Because the difference between the laser disc and the DVD was so visible that people, if you had started showing the DVD and then showed the laser disc, they'd never believe that you had a real laser disc playing the way it's supposed to look. But we always started with the laser disc first, get everybody's agreement that the laser disc looked right, and then show them what DVD looked like. And it was a really telling experience. And I know, yeah.
We started with a VHS, then we went to Laserdisc, and then we went to DVD.
He's right. I'm remembering the penultimate. But we had the Laserdisc or VHS player in the next room, and that's where that was played. But what we were playing on the DVD was right there in front of you. and you could see it. And we did this demonstration all over the planet, all over Europe, in the Bahamas and Japan, and really the team that Terry was part of was a National Teleconsultants was the vendor, but they gave us the support to go and run these demos, and they got really good at it. So it went well. The manufacturing of the discs was something that Time Warner also dived into. And what we started doing, they created a new organization called Warner Advanced Media Operations, I believe is what WAMO meant. It was called WAMO. And it was funded by Jerry Levin out of corporate to develop a way to manufacture the discs. And by the end of '94, they had all the equipment and procedures in place to start producing some discs. But the things that we learned about the disc as they produced them, because it was thinner, it was much faster cycle time to make than to make the thicker disc. And then it was also easier to read because it was, the lens was closer to the surface and the laser could make a smaller dot, and you didn't have to have tilt servos in the players and all. So there were advantages to the players as well as to the disc in the manufacturing process. So we took what we had to other manufacturers as well as studios, and the demos that we were doing for producers and for distributors and directors all over the world, and trying to get their support for putting their product out in this way. And I forgot to mention the last piece of the demo. If those of you are old enough to remember The Fugitive, not the TV show, but the Harrison Ford one, there's a train wreck in there. And so when we did the demos, we did not spare the subwoofer. And so you'd sit there and you'd watch the bus come down the hill and the train hit it and the cars go flying, and it was genuinely in surround. And it was genuinely experienced that nobody, I think, ever expected to hear off their VHS. So it was part of the success of the demonstrations. The other thing then that we had approached other manufacturers to partner, Sony and Philips, because they had developed CD and they were accustomed to licensing CDs in the marketplace. So they had the infrastructure to deal with that kind of business. And so the thought we had was to see if they would join with us. And they expressed some enthusiasm. But then next thing we knew, they decided they're going to do MMCD, which was a 1.2 millimeter disc that they were bringing to market that was supposed to be a direct head-to-head competitor against DVD, which we were sorry to see, especially because the format that was on MMCD was pretty much the same format that had been bugs in our early testing. So we felt that they had made a mistake. But then we had DVD wars where they were out demonstrating to everybody and we were out demonstrating to everybody to try and show the differences. Finally, somebody was telling me the story tonight, I forget who it was, but wanting to know if the story they had heard was true, that peace broke out between the two camps of MMCD and DVD over dinner in a Chinese restaurant in Tokyo. And I can affirm that that is in fact true. And the result was that there was an agreement to exchange some technologies so that everybody was contributing to it. And the result is that a DVD-5 actually has 4.7 gigabytes on it. And it goes up through a DVD-9, having less. And then the ultimate deluxe is the DVD-18, which is exactly 17. That's because the differences made in the technology because of the merger of specs actually reduced the overall capacity. But you'll still find references to DVD-18s, DVD-9s, and DVD-5s, but there are no such things anymore. So,
Chris?
yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt, but just to amplify, one of the reasons why that Tokyo dinner, one of the things that prompted it was the output of the Hollywood Advisory Committee.
Yes.
That was put together with people from computer backgrounds, Alan Bell from IBM,
Mm-hmm.
people from Warner, who made it look like other studios were actually coming together over this. Actually, there was a little bit of puppeteering going on.
Sorry. We don't say that publicly.
No, we never say that publicly. But the good news here is that the feature set for multiple aspect ratios and multiple languages and in some cases soundtracks apart from languages and multiple subtitles and multiple menu sets and all this multiple stuff was fashioned in such a way that bugs couldn't possibly contain it and deliver it, and only Taz could.
I think the PC way to tell this part of the story is that the demos that we did and what we did in showing everybody what a DVD could do persuaded a lot of people that those were all good things to have.
Of course, that's a beautiful way of putting it.
And the result was that the list from all the studios was informed by what they'd seen was possible. And so they all signed off on the list, and it made the outcome much easier to get to.
And the reason why I don't think I'm betraying any confidence is that all this is public record. The output of the Hollywood Disc Advisory Committee is out there. You can Google it. You can look at the different feature sets, and those numbers add up to DVD.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to IBM, as things evolved, IBM became one of the principal partners in carrying forward DVD. And so IBM, in the person of Alan Bell, who many of you may remember, became a member of our team ultimately, but he was one of the people who actually worked on the laser disc recorder and player that RCA showed at the NAB in about 1968, I think it was. So anyway, 1970, 72, I think. Anyway, Alan Bell and Dan Sullivan from IBM, who, Lewis, Dan Sullivan just appeared in my emails today. Yeah. Anyway, they became very much involved, and we worked on making DVD an accessory for PCs, and they developed that, and eventually developed a laptop with a DVD player in it, and that was the first one of its kind. Ultimately, Toshiba and everybody else did them, but they developed that, and I remember when we first got the first laptop from IBM to demonstrate, I was asked to go to meet with the board of Time Warner. And so Beverly Sills and Fay Vincent and all these guys, Ted Turner, in the boardroom. And I started it up and it crashed. So I stood there tap dancing while it rebooted, but it ultimately worked. A lot of people were very upset about how long the first generation of commercially sold DVD players took to start up, because you'd turn it on and you'd wait a long time before it would give you a movie. And the reason for that was that they were basically PCs, and they had to go through a whole PC boot up in the beginning. Anyway, what came out of that, though, was another project that we had. We had the WB network had gone on the air, and Jamie Kellner, who was the president of the network, was very distressed that when he started his network, markets 1 through 100 had enough stations in them to get another affiliate, because in Los Angeles, there's more than 4 TV stations. But if you get to the 100th market and down, there are frequently only 3 and occasionally 4, but there's never one for the 5th network. So he couldn't get carriage in half the TV stations in the country. And so his request was, give me a way to make it look like I have a TV station. Give me a way to make it look like I have a TV station in every town. And so we worked with IBM to take the PC that was a DVD player and play files from its hard drive, and then intermix, cutting back and forth to a network feed that was coming by satellite. And the result was that we ran the network, Eastern Western network, out of Los Angeles down by the airport. And it was a network, but all the commercials, all the IDs, all the promos and all of that were locally inserted in the PC. And we fed all of that material as file transfer into the hard drives. And we had to have, I think, a 3 gigabyte hard drive. And as time went by and this was still running, the hard drives began to fail. And eventually you couldn't get a 3 gigabyte hard drive anywhere. So you could get a 50, or you could get solid state memory. But at the time, we had to promise Bob Daly, who was the chairman of Warner Brothers, that eventually we could get these hard drives. Because as we began programming and building the system, you couldn't get a 3 gigabyte hard drive cheap enough to actually do the business model. But we said, they're coming down. Anyway, they came down to the point where the business model worked, and they were cheap enough to do, and we launched, I think it was about 480 TV stations that were in fact a PC in a closet at a cable head end, and they looked every bit like a TV station. We had a place up in Tahoe we used to watch, I think it was Channel 17 in Reno, which I immodestly say was one of the best looking TV stations in Reno. But it delivered what looked like a local TV station with all the local promos and commercials and everything else that you would expect. And so that was a successful program. So we had 480 TV stations being run by 4 people, and a big IBM commercial computer, the one that was at the time, I think, also beating grandmasters playing chess. But that was a long time ago. Anyway, so that was the beginning of our file transfer distribution of material. And so we ended up developing that further for the syndication business. Warner Brothers is one of the larger syndication operators. And so we moved to file transfer delivery from that. But I see it as a progression that goes directly from the full service network to DVD to the WB100 to file transfer distribution of materials. I keep scaring myself. Anyway, we have Louis and Terry here who were part of this experience and can help in taking on any questions that you may have about what we forgot to say.
I used to work at POP, and we were affiliated with SynRAM, and we did some encoding. And in the beginning of the whole DVD thing, we had to choose the right encoder. I was curious which encoders, maybe you went to a series of them, but which MPEG encoders and authoring systems were you using? You didn't mention any of them. It was all about the playback, but I was wondering.
The ones we started with were based on C-cube encoders, and they were developmental ones, and we wrote a lot of software for them. And we then developed a whole encoding group at California Video Center. Brad Collar was supposed to be here, and he was the guy who authored the very first DVD we ever commercially produced. It was, I think, Cutthroat Island in Korean. That was the very first DVD we ever made commercially. And he's the guy who actually authored it. So he can go into more detail about the authoring. One thing we did do, though, in developing a lot of our own tools and in developing the staff that helped on a lot of this is Chuck Dages, who used to run that part of the group, made a deal with the government of Singapore to train people there who wanted to learn how to do this so that they could go into business supporting DVD in Asia. And so we had a number of people from Singapore working in our facility who were employees of the government of Singapore who were sent here for the purpose of learning. And we did this as a missionary thing to try and get the format more readily available around the world. And they turned out to be a lot of bright people. We hired two people from UCLA, Brad and Jinha Kim was the other. And the two of them were both PhD students in engineering. And all I can say is I don't know if Brad ever finished because we hired him out of like the first year of his PhD program, and he's still there. So he's been there 30 years doing this and knows a great deal more than I do about the intricacies of the encoding. Yes?
So when you were doing the WB East and West distribution, you mentioned that you had the hard drive with the DVD inserting ads and things like that. Now it's all fast and SCSI marks. How did you guys do the insertion and playback of that stuff?
It was simple switching, and one of the things that was the hardest to teach IBM was that it doesn't matter that the switch to the commercial be absolutely in time, because they wanted to make it all controlled by the GPS and all. And we said it's only important that the switching happen in time with the feed that you are switching in and out of. And so they told us we were wrong, and then they built it that way. And then the team that replaced the first team built it the way we asked for it. And it still works.
To this day. All right, any other questions or thoughts for Chris? Oh, here we go.
Just wondering what you changed on the DVD to go from 4.7 gig to 9 gig.
Well,
what
5 to 4.7 resulted from a change in modulation and error correction. And 9 gig, which is less now than 9, went from adding a second layer, and the player then can switch between the layers. So you can read one layer, going back to the original numbers, one 5 gigabyte layer, and then there was a 4.5 gigabyte layer behind it. And because it was behind it, it was a little harder to read, so that's why the capacity was less. And then an 18, DVD 18 was 2 of those back to back, so that there were 4 layers. You could read the first layer, the second layer, and you had to turn the disc over and read the 4th layer, 3rd layer, and the 4th layer. So that's how you get to those numbers. But we didn't have all of those numbers in the beginning because it took a lot of experimentation to refine everything to get it to that point. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and the Warner Brothers stations, you're talking about the 100 stations in all those markets, that computer install that you were talking about?
Yeah.
That install, when it just cable head ends, it was only for cable companies, not over the air, right?
No, it wasn't over the air. It was for cable because they had the connection to the homes. So there was no broadcast license available, so we couldn't put it on the air. So we had to deliver it using cable. But if you were a cable customer and getting all your regular TV stations off the cable, this looked just like one of the others. We made up call letters for them and everything.
May I jump in?
Any other questions?
Yeah, John Scheich.
All right, big round of applause for Chris. Whoop. Hold on. Somebody on Zoom asking a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me from Zoom?
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, can you hear me from Zoom? Can Chris hear me?
Is there a doctor in the house?
So, if he can't hear me, just a delightful presentation.
No,
and
go ahead.
really interested to hear about the politics of DVD. And certainly I remember Chris from my CMX days over at CBS, and it's absolutely great to see him here. Thank you.
Was there a question you wanted to ask?
Mainly just, I really appreciate the presentation. It's really about the politics of introducing a product, and I think that's amazing.
I think you really hit it on nail on the head there. It was introducing the product and bringing it to market. It's really fantastic what these gentlemen did, from ground up.
Hi, so I'm not an engineer, but I worked with Chris and Wendy and Lewis and others as a lawyer on this. And just to respond to that question about the politics, I remember going to meetings with other home video executives when Warren was first talking about DVD and hearing from a lot of the other studios, why in the world would you want to introduce a competing format? VHS is a strong and growing business. Just thought you might be interested in that.
I tried to touch on that. Did anybody catch that part? I think it was seen in Warner Home Video that the VHS business was doomed in the future that was coming. And we were doing some of the stuff that was doing it with the work we were doing for the full service network to try to establish that you could get the same kind of functionality you were used to with VHS tapes without having to go anyplace and just turn it on and it was there and you could control it and use it. And that caused a case of paranoia in the folks at the Warner Home Video business. And that's why they wanted to try to seek something that they could sell under $10 that had the kind of functionality that we described. And that's what led to the product. Not all of the competitors saw it that way at first. And it took a lot of missionary work to get people to understand what we saw coming in the market.
And that's how, technology continues. Go ahead.
And then the war started all over again with Blu-ray between Toshiba and Sony and Philips and all of that.
The war over Blu-ray was interesting because as we knew from the early conversations with Sony, their belief in their engineering department was firmly that you shouldn't be doing any of this stuff until you have a blue laser, because a blue laser can focus to a smaller dot and you can get more data on the disk. And so Blu-ray became kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy within that engineering group. In our group, we had a little different take on where things were going. We were studying very hard on AVC and the compression you could do with the new compression standards, and believed that with the disk we could make under the old spec for DVD, we could compress the movies enough with AVC to make that original DVD spec, especially since we now had 2-layer, 3-layer, and 4-layer discs available, that we didn't need to make another disc. And the Blu-ray was projected to be fairly expensive compared to the DVD. Now the DVD was in mass production. And I remember the guys from Philips, who I guess don't do any of this stuff anymore, in my office kind of yelling at me saying, why do you care so much about the cost of the discs? Our analysis tells us that when this is at full speed running in the marketplace, it's only going to be 50 cents more per disc. Why do you care about 50 cents? And I said, because we make 300 million of these a year and it adds up. So anyway, the compromise ultimately that got everybody together on this was they did add AVC compression to the Blu-ray spec, and the rest is playing out the way it plays out.
Yep, and fantastic.
One of the other things that I was going to mention was that an interesting story goes on regional coding. The video business was used to the idea that you made PAL discs in Europe and CCAM discs in France, and in South America it was a mixture, and that in the US we had NTSC 525, and that the players, the VHS machines, didn't do such a good job of playing one that it's not made for. And so they were comfortable in the release standards that were in place in the whole industry, and that is that movies would release in one part of the world, and then they'd release in another part of the world, and there was no such thing in the olden days as simultaneous day-and-date release worldwide of a movie. You used to make a couple of thousand prints, and you'd move them around, and they go different places, or you'd do these things in small waves, and the advertising would follow. And the studios insisted that there had to be a way of controlling the regional playability of a disc. So if you look into DVD, you'll see that there's region 1, region 2, region 3, and so on. And the interesting thing about that is two things. One is that Lewis and I wrote the patent on how it's done, and the first studio to stop using it was Warner Brothers. So anyway, there are 8 of these. This patent that you see here is the one for the multiple aspect ratios being on one disc, so that you don't have to have dual inventory. It's one of, I think we have decided it's 8 that we wrote at Warner that are fundamental required parts of every DVD bit ever made. So there's 8 of these, and Lewis, I've learned, has far more patents than I actually do. Wow. How many?
US is up to 90.
Wow.
Yeah. And I only,
Not about this.
no, but I only have 75, so he's got me beat. Anyway, anything else? Can I break any more eardrums?
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for a great evening. and enjoy. Take care. Bye. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.